her folks were also ranchers, worked on a place that's called the Murphy Larson Ranch up by Clark, and owned a little bed and breakfast that's over on 7th and Oak. So her history runs real deep in this community, and we're glad she was able to come back. I'm Marsha Daughenbaugh, and I am the Executive Director of the Community Agriculture Alliance, which is probably the best job in the whole world to have, because my passion runs deep for agriculture. And I feel it's critical that we in this community educate and promote the value of that product that we have here and that our history is so deeply bent on. I'm not going to talk a lot because Diane is one of, she's a direct descendant of one of our centennial ranches. To become a centennial farm in Colorado, you have to have continuous family history, ownership of a piece of property that is actually producing for agricultural products for over 100 years. And the Hitchens Ranch was first homesteaded in 1886 by Diane's great-grandfather. And also with her today is her daughter Sophie. So you are now looking at fifth generations. I am only a 3rd generation, and we are raising little ones who are now the 5th, and we are in the same location in the lower Elk River, but we have a little while to go before we'll be able to be a centennial. The other centennial farms that are in this area are the Summer Ranch. There's a nice exhibit here of Vernon Summer, so if you have a chance, be sure to stop in and do that. The Soash Farm, which is at the head of the Sleeping Giant. The Munger, which also is at the Sleeping Giant area. Stanko's, which are about 5 miles out in the South Valley. Zahner's at the Hayden, in the Hayden area. Judy and Jerry Green, which are south of Hayden. The Sullivans, which are in the Rio Blanco, Moffett, and Routt area. So there's only 8 farms that have actually succeeded so far to, or I shouldn't say there's a few more, but they haven't applied. But there's 8 that have actually applied and been accepted as centennial farms. If you see a farmer and a rancher this week, please give them a hug or a thank you. Naked and hungry, that's where you would be without agriculture. And we need to be very, very grateful for those people that are helping keep us fed. I don't think there's a person in here that's hungry today, and it's because of the American rancher and farmer. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Diane. Okay?
What kind of signal for Sophie? What, should I say click? Sure. Okay. I thought it was appropriate just to open real quick, since we're in the Utterback house, that I have a quote from Doc Utterback from the 3-Wire Winter about early agriculture. And if you knew Doc, he's about as tall as me, and he'd set his face, so I would talk like him. Today people complain about working long hours. If they had to do some of the things we did, people faked. Early homesteaders came from all over. Of course, a lot of them gave up, and they went back because of the weather and because of the land. It was really hard the Homestead Act was 160 acres. There's no way in this arid land like Missouri. So a lot of people had to give up. We bought out their homesteads. Everybody worked darn hard. The men weren't the only ones that worked hard. My mother used to work like the dickens. She used to milk cows, raise chickens. Why, she'd even go out and help in the fields with stacking of the hay and the grain. And garden, my God! Her garden was at least a ½ acre. Taters, cabbage, rutabagas, beets, peas, whatever we wanted to eat during that year, we had to raise or do it without. There was no running down to the store and buying it out of a tin can or a wax carton. So that kind of sets the tone. It was really hard back then. Oh, click. Here's what people across the nation think of agriculture. This iconic 1930s painting. But there are some true-to-life characteristics. When we go through the slides, you will notice the overalls, the glasses, the bat and board siding. There was a lot of that in Routt County. The apron, the tool, the primitive tools. Click. People that came here, the early settlers, they came with that little carrot that you could squat on a piece of land, and you had to fulfill 3 things for this Homestead Act. You had to be a U.S. citizen, you had to plow up ground and prove a crop, and you had to live in a dwelling at least 6 months of the year. Okay?
What happened with this, though, we had many homesteaders come into this country, and it was so hard. It was so, 160 acres, you truly could not make a living on it. So a lot of the adjoining neighbors started buying up the properties and people left. The phenomena today is that we have now gone back to fracturing the land. You will see as you look across our valley, many 35-acre tracts that people again are calling ranches. The unfortunate part about it is that 35 acres still is too large to call a lawn and too small to call a ranch.
Right. So what my granddad did is that, we can't really see it, but there's an application number here. He applied in 1884, but he didn't get his patent on the land till 1899 because he had to denounce Queen Mother, and there was a lot of hoops to jump through as far as citizenship. And it's signed by William McKinley back then. Well, actually his secretary, but yeah. So there's his 160 acres. When he did everything he could and jumped through all those hoops, he got to buy the first 160 acres for guess how much? $1.25 an acre. Okay, so let's go to dwellings. Going ahead. Here's one. Timber in a lot of areas was very sparse. This is a log barn back here made out of the log construction. And look at the top. In later years you could afford tin, but before, up here, you have your grass. We really don't have sod here like on the plains, but a grass and dirt roof. This is a cultivator. He's replacing the tongue because it's going to be pulled by horses. Notice this big rock here? Click. Every farmer and rancher had to pick rocks all their life. So I just thought that was kind of funny. That rock pile just gets bigger and bigger. Okay, next. Here's an old homestead. It has probably two or three rooms. There's your root cellar. That was the only way you could preserve food unless you put it in the creek. Creamery house, outhouse. And this is a later picture, but most of the early homesteads did look like this.
As we go through these pictures, one thing that I'd like for you to notice is how small the houses are compared to the outbuildings. And the reason for that is that the outbuildings were where you made your living. They protected your livestock, your equipment, and your crops. So it was much more important to have a larger barn than it was to have a larger house. Your kids could double up, triple up, quarter up in beds.
So inside the house, they also brought their own history a lot of times. These early immigrants came from the old country, wherever that would be. And before they left, they would spend a lot of money and get one nice portrait done so that people back home would remember them, and so they could take something to the new country to have that connection. Next. Commonly, there was the family Bible that came too, that recorded all the births, the marriages, and the deaths. So those were two very important things besides your trunk and your farm implements that they brought. Okay, next.
And today, all of your farmers and ranchers are just as modernized as anyone else. We're all using computers and the internet. And do we record it in our family Bibles anymore? Probably not. Have we lost something here? Probably.
Yes.
Do we need to pass out pieces of paper?
Oh, forgot. Shall we still do it?
Sure, because you're just
all right.
Started on that.
All right, there's a whole bunch of pens.
If you have a pen with you.
I have tons of pens.
Okay.
So, we were going to do a little fun thing where as you went through these slides, we were going to have you tally up every time you saw pots and cans. Just a second.
Every time you saw what?
Pots and cans. Like anytime a pots, like here a can, tally for the slide. Which slides? So by slide only, not by the can. So every time you see a slide that had a pot or a can in it, or a chicken, do a tally mark. And then at the end, whoever will give out a little door prize. Yeah. Does anyone want to participate? You do not have to participate, only if you want to. Cans there, you're only going to do one tally mark for the slide. Yes, I do. You live on is water. This well was dug on that first homestead. I have an old 1918 little diary. And it took them almost 6 months because he was working at the mine. He was coming home and digging 6 feet at a time in the winter. And finally, when he got to 30 feet, he hit water. Then he had to find a pipe, and they installed a pipe. So she was very happy not to carry buckets of water from the river. She had it right outside her door. All right, next.
Half a mile to a mile away.
Yes, it was about a mile away to get water.
Wow.
This is a little different type of home construction. These were in Milner. Aren't those different roofs? And those were a little bit later, like in the 30s. Notice the overalls going on. Sheep were not that common in Routt County. There were more in Moffat County. Would you agree, Marsha?
Mm-hmm.
But people did raise sheep to eat for their personal use. And of course, this shows our attachment to all our farm animals. We love them and we eat them at the same time. And it's very hard sometimes, but we do it. Next.
And there's a chicken on the side of the slide that you can't see because it's cut off.
Oh. Dang, okay.
Don't count that one.
Yes.
Count this one, yeah.
This little gal, she's playing with the old tin cans. But that's also the dump. You didn't have a dump back then. You just picked a place on your farm, and that was the dump. And periodically you'd burn it down, then you'd add more to it. A lot of common times they dig a hole, but other times it was just a heap. Next. And the most fun thing in my childhood was going around and excavating these dumps for all the bottles. Okay. Pool, Colorado was on the stage route by Milner. This little addition here, this first thing is a 2-room log house. The other was built later, and it was the post office. And this man right here, he was interviewed in his 80s, and he said, "My dad built a 2-room log house for us to live in. The house had a dirt roof because there was no lumber to buy. He took logs about 8 inches through, so he put a log up here, a log down here on each side. Then he split logs, and he put the split side down and started stacking them this way. And then my dad gathered grass to lay on the roof so the dirt would not fall through. But when it rained a lot, it was very muddy." So, and then later this has been replaced by lap siding and the tin. But he was born in that house in 1896. Next. Let's go to food.
Diane, could you name those people as you reference your grandfather and your father and just...
Albert. Well, actually that was James. James is the one who built it. He came from England. Okay. You had to have your trusty gun because when you first moved here, it took a while to get your crops in, and it took a while to start your chickens. So wildlife was a plentiful source here. Huge for your settler. He just bagged some ducks. And this is on my other side of my family in Hayden. Next. Go ahead. And there's a close-up. And it wasn't only the men that brought home the bacon. This is my great-grandma. Bagged that deer. Didn't have a lot of refrigeration, so your root cellar was very important. And jerky and canning. Next. When the settlers first moved here, especially the miners, they said you could throw a rock and hit any sage chicken. They were that plentiful. By the time the miners got done and the early settlers, they actually had to put seasons on these because you can see it was a mainstay. There, next. All right. Then, to supplement the game, almost every farm had chickens and a pig or two. Dairy, got to have your milk. All right.
And these are all your relatives?
Yes. And then I gotta remember to talk about, I tried not to make this all about my family, so I went back to Three Water Winter and found some other settlers, early settlers. These are pigs. This is the pigsty. Elaine Gay, who lives out by Pleasant Valley. She said, years ago, my dad, these aren't hers, but it goes with the pig idea. Years ago, my dad raised pigs. It was up to us kids to take care of the pigs. We would take grain out to big barrels. We would do that every night. It was our chore to carry all the grain and water, and we'd put the water in and soak the grain, feed that out to the pigs, and then we had to keep refilling it. She said, then Dad said, well, if you do that, I'll give you a pig. So as soon as they got a pig, raised it up and sold it, he said, I'll buy your pig and I'll get you a calf. So that's how they got to raise money. And that was their first education in lots of chores. Kids, from the time they were 2, had chores on the ranch all day long. Next. Oh, and see the, oh yeah, it's okay.
What did we
Here,
see?
I was just going to point out that soddy roof again. Right there. Tin and soddy. They're doing a transition there. Okay, next. Thanks, Sophie. This is a farrowing. My granddad decided he was going to get into pigs, and he had like 30 head. And come on in. These are like farrowing channels. I cannot imagine the amount of mud. Well, he got out of the pig business real soon because he found out how hard it was to keep them in. All right, next. Jump in anytime, Marsha.
I can't, you're too interested.
Oh, okay. So this is an excerpt from that 1918 journal. She was telling about how it's January 18th and it's really cold out. She goes, we butchered today and I really helped. I did all the running for them. I think every woman in this thing can understand how important it is to run for the men and get everything ready. It was awfully cold today. The pig dressed out at 20 pounds.
120.
120 pounds. I think this is good for a 7-month-old hog. Oh, yeah.
It is. You're at a dressed weight, it's about half of what the live weight is.
Got it. Next. Everyone had a garden. And like Doc said, his mom's was a half acre. If you notice, there's a fence around it because you have, just like today, there's so many analogies there with the garden.
That's right where you put in your garden wall.
I know. So Keith Selby, he said during the Depression, they moved here from the dust storms. He said, we got through the depression because of a garden. We never went hungry, but we went out without money lots of times. We went to town generally once a week. We took a case of eggs. That was 30 eggs. That would be enough to buy our necessities. Sugar was $6 for 100 pounds. Flour, equally the same. Shoes were $1 a pair, and our shirts were made by hand. We had no electric lights, and we only had wood heat, so we didn't have a lot of expenses. All right, next. That's a close-up of the Routt cellar. In this country, have you noticed there's a lot of sandstone rock? That's all stacked sandstone. And a cellar was awesome because you could store all your produce from the summer in there. It stayed a good 40 degrees, I think, 40 to 50 degrees. You want to comment on the eggs, how they stored eggs?
There were 2 ways that they stored eggs to keep them year-round because their hens would kind of quit laying during the winter. It was so cold. And one way was to put a little bit of grease, lard, on them and then put them into a grain bin. And that way they would stay fresh. They could continue to use them throughout the entire fall, or spring rather. The second way was to store them in cold water. They'd have to rechange that water all the time, but they wouldn't stay as fresh as long because that membrane would come off the eggs, and they tended not to stay as fresh as long.
And then my dad also said he remembers when he was little, they had big barrels of lard because they butchered a lot of pigs. You get a lot of lard if you get that pig big enough. He said his mom used to push the eggs down in the lard to keep them. I guess it sealed them.
So how long could you keep an egg doing those things?
Probably several months.
Oh, yeah. They would use them clear into the springtime when the hens would start laying again.
And I'm sure they ate a lot of iffy food. You know what I mean?
The thing is, if you start eating iffy food young, your stomach gets accustomed to it, and
Right.
it's all good to go.
Right. Next. almost everybody had their dairy cows for their own consumption, and if you had enough cows, it was a great added benefit to take it into town and trade it for other supplies that you didn't have. Bob Gay said that everybody milked 2 or 3 cows. They had a cream check that came in every week. Back then, during the Depression, there was a local creamery, and you could ship it to Denver. For many, many people, their cream check bought their groceries and made their living. He also said, eggs, chickens, everybody kept a pig or 2. You had your own pork, your own eggs, your own garden, your own milk, and even the grain that fed them.
In Routt County, we went as far as to have about 7 commercial dairies at one time during the 50s and the 60s. The biggest problem was shipping the milk out in a safe and sanitary manner and getting it here to Denver in a timely manner. So these dairies kind of went the wayside. For a little while, even people on the local ranches stopped milking cows. And about 10 years ago, according to the census, we only had 6 milk cows in all of Routt County. However, there's a resurgence of it because of the local food. There's some folks that are willing to milk cows. Again, if not for their own use, then also for some other people as well. And there's another gentleman that's now trying to start a commercial dairy again.
And you can see the love for your cows. When they got too old, you ate them. Okay. Oh, and the bell. And the bell. A lot of times if you had a herd of milk cows, the bell is your lead cow. You've trained her to bring in the other cows. You get her started and they all follow.
Or at least you can find them.
And find them. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I have a... You can hear them. Go ahead. Next slide. Here we go. Snowed a little bit, just enough to clean the mud up. I think we can all relate to that even today. The cow and I had a terrible rumpus, and I chased her all over Milner. It was dreadful cold of the consequence. I got a cold. And then at the very bottom, my grandfather had a hernia, so he was having trouble doing hard work for ranching, so he was working over at the McGregor mine. He puts in there, I worked at the mine all day. I made $5.60. Do you know how huge that was back in 1918? Okay.
And this continues today. In all of Routt County, we think we only have 2 current ranches that one, if not both, of the people do not work off the ranch to help support this nasty habit that we call ranching and farming. But in this community, we're lucky because there are jobs available. In a lot of rural America, there's nowhere to go to town and work. And so we are able to sustain a lot of our farms and ranches here because of the recreation and the service industries that this town requires.
Next. There's the dairy cow. And notice the roof and the construction again. Okay, next. Here's the dairy calves. This is a typical slide. Look at how many buckets are in this picture. Oh my gosh. I can't imagine a big wind coming up. Where would your buckets be? But also it points out that I'm sure one of the jobs of that young child was to feed the bucket calves, to carry over the extra milk. You started at a very young age and you chipped in any way you could. Okay, next. The horse. The importance of the horse in early agriculture. Transportation. You got your nice buggy to go to town, people that could afford it. And next. You rode your horse to school. I don't know how many kids. Hazel Henson, she was a pioneer family out by, she was born in 1899, she's up by Phippsburg. She said, when I went to school, we just tied them up to the fence in back of the school. They stood there all day, and then at noon, we'd take them a little water and we'd feed them. And then at 4 o'clock, we'd get on our horses and we rode home. I found myself just riding my horse so I could just talk to him. We had a lot of nice long rides together.
My dad would tell about when they rode their horse to school, how many times they had an oats bucket so their horse would be fed, but during the Depression, they had one little sandwich, and the horse actually ate better than the kids did, because that horse was so important to their livelihood.
Yep. And this is the Fair Play Schoolhouse. It's out on right next to Marsha's place. Okay. And your horse was also your form of entertainment and getting together to do. You would think spending time on a horse all day long or plowing, you would be done with horses. No, they would organize picnics on Saturdays and they'd go up. This is on the top of Sleeping Giant. We call it Elk Mountain where we are. But this is on top of Sleeping Giant. They went for a ride.
And that's not easy to get to.
No. Nope.
No,
Next. Okay. Love this picture because it shows the workhorses. They're all tacked up to full farm equipment, but look at the mud. It was a hard life back then. Women would spend a whole day just washing for a family of 4. Whole day drying, let it dry. Whole day of ironing. And here's the iconic, oh sorry, you don't have to go back. I was just going to show that iconic overalls again. Okay, kids were raised on horses. From the time you were 2 on, you were raised on a horse. These 2 young gentlemen, Melvin and his cousin, are going on a pack trip up to Buffalo Pass here. Well, 2 days out, they got tired of it and came home. They never made it, but they had a grand time camping on the way. I think they got clear to Steamboat.
How young they are.
Yeah, I'll bet you they're only 10 or 12. But back then, you were raised on a horse, and it was natural for you to take a trip like that.
Plus, you were expected to grow up a lot faster.
Yes.
You were just part of everything that was going on.
And you knew how to survive already at that point.
They got their trusty hat, got their ropes, they've got their supplies. Yep. Next. This is actually a harrow. They're harrowing a garden. And they took time to take a shot of that with the family. Next. And your team was so important to you. In the back there, that you can't really see it, but you hauled gravel for your roads, you hauled dirt, you hauled crops, you hauled the kids, coal. Your team was one of the most valuable, like Marsha said, valuable things you had. And I think it's kind of interesting that there's so much pride that that has a really nice harness too. That is not, that's a...
However, that was one thing that the guys liked to do in the evenings in the long winter, was sit around, work on their harnesses and their halters, that sort of thing. Gave them something to do while the women were still cooking and cleaning.
Next. Okay. Do you see? It's really hard to see, but he's standing on something with a shovel. Coal. Bob Gay. Oh no, where's my coal? Here's my coal one. Every farm house, they either used wood or coal, but coal was plentiful here. Everyone had their own little coal mine. Not everyone. Lots of farmers had their own coal mine out of the side of the hill, or when they got enough, they'd sell it to other people. So Bob Gay said that there were a lot of little wagon miners in the country. A lot of people, especially the ranchers, hauled coal to town, like Steamboat, and sold it. A lot of people that were primarily grain farmers hauled coal in the winter, because you can only farm in the summer. Many people hauled coal in the fall just for their own supply. Okay, next. And then this is down by Hayden. This is my great-grandfather on my other side. He had a contract to haul ice. That is an ice sled, and behind it is the ice house.
Wow. Gorgeous.
And you would go and cut your ice out of the river, take it in the shed, sprinkle a whole bunch of sawdust on it, stack up your layers, and then you'd sell it in the summer.
Wow.
Next. Just a reminder that, yes, the car replaced the horse, but there was a huge transitional time. Okay, next.
Expensive buggies.
Beef and hay. All right. Oh, it's too long. This shot was taken in the 20s. This shot was taken in the 80s. I thought that was an amazing contrast
Wow.
and comparison.
Probably not the same horses.
No. So, as much as agriculture has advanced in technology and tractors and stuff, there's still some time-honored methods that it's just the best way to go.
Matt and Christy Belton still prefer to feed with team and sled, and they use 4-horse to pull. And their famous quote is, "It always starts when it's 30 below."
Yes. Next. There's the typical winter. And if you notice, these horses are actually on a sled trail. And Bob Gay says, you know, it's unbelievable how, if a horse was raised in this country and worked all the time, like this one was, how they could walk a sled trail. Of course, some of them were better than others, but everybody bragged about their own good team. It was a source of pride. The horses were a must. A good team could walk like a cat going down a fence pole. Go ahead.
My dad fed with team and sled well into his 80s. And until we had the equipment to go out and break those trails, after he fed one morning, then he would let the horses rest for a little bit. He'd go in and get a bite to eat, and then he'd go back out into the meadow with the same team, and he would stand on the double trees, no sled behind, and have the horses literally draw the trail for the next morning. Because this hay is heavy, and if you have your sleds full, it's real hard for those horses to break through that snow for the next trail. So there was a lot of work involved, not only with the actual feeding of the hay, or if loose hay like this is, or even if it was a small bales, but then there was a lot of work that you did for the preparation for the next day as well.
And if your horse, it was very valuable. We all know just from raising other animals, there's dumb animals and there's smart animals, and you can have a dumb horse and a smart horse. The best horses for the team were the ones that could feel that sled trail and stay on the trail. If you had a young, experienced horse, sometimes they would get off into that deep powder, and the only thing you could do is stop the whole operation, unharness everything, help them wallow out, get up, reharness them on, get that pulled up, that sled pulled up, and it could take hours.
If any of you have lifted snowmobiles, it ain't nothing compared to one of those.
Yeah. Or even the horse. Some horses would just give up. They'll just lay there and go, okay, I'm stuck. And then you have to figure that out too. Next. Okay, you fed your cows all winter, and they have babies in the spring. She's going, do you see any buckets? In the spring time, you got all your cattle into the corral, and it's time to take them out to pasture. The importance of the brand. The brand tells you which calves are yours. These calves have been separated off, and if you look in the background, there's the mamas back there. What a bawling mess. It is loud. Okay, next.
What's the breed on these?
Hereford.
Good job.
Yeah.
Herefords. Herefords used to be the predominant herd here. Now Angus are.
And for a while, they did the Angus-Hereford cross. Mm-hmm.
Why the difference? Why you
Angus are better suited to high altitude than the Herefords. They just do better.
So here's this. I swear every rancher has a picture of this. The iconic branding day. You stretch that calf out. You go grab the calf either with a short rope or by hand, drag it next to the fire. One sits and holds the neck, and one holds the back legs, because you want that calf to be really, really, really still, so that when you brand, you get a good clean. It's better on the calf, everything, to get a good clean, quick, unsmudged brand.
And I always have people ask me, does it hurt to brand? And the answer is, yes, it does. Do you have a tattoo?
Because if you've ever been mad at a cow and try to get it to go somewhere and whack it, they don't feel anything. They have really tough hides, and when you have a hot enough branding iron, you're searing the hide, and it's quick. Have you ever had just a tiny little burn and a little bit more burn. The tiniest burns, those steam burns, are the ones that hurt the worst. So it only hurts for a little while. And it is all about work, but they always took time. A lot of people took time to have that beer after a good hard day's work. There were times to rest and relax and enjoy. Next. This isn't a real good picture because usually your herds are bigger, but this is turning out. You gathered them all up, you took them up to high country. Next.
We used to be able to trail cattle on the roads here. Even down Highway 40, herds would be trailed. That's almost a thing of the past anymore because of the traffic that's on the road, the bicycles that are on the road. And cattle just don't seem to understand bicycles at all. And you can get the bicycles through, but then you spend hours trying to get your cattle back. And so most people now are trailing or are trucking their animals from location to location. If you should ever see one, take a picture because it's going to be a thing of the past before too long. But don't get out to take your picture.
Just roll down the window. Steamboat, if you notice, Steamboat is one of those towns that has the widest streets. 2,000 head used to go through there at a time, right? Does anyone know what this is?
The giant.
Do you know what mountain? Yes, Sleeping Giant. And it doesn't look much different back then than it does now. Before these fences, the range looked like that. You turn your cattle out, your neighbors would turn cattle out. There were no fences to Wyoming. You would have fences around your homesteads, but in the fall, when everybody gathered, clear up into the 20s and 30s, everyone gathered. They went out, hit the water sources, gathered cows, put them on their place, and people would go place to place and pick up their cattle. That's where the brand was so important. And that's the big thing about pioneers. Everyone was in it together. You relied a lot on your neighbor, socially, gathering, your livelihood, everything. Okay, this is a contraption that stacks loose hay. He's sitting on the back. There's a long tongue here, and it's connected to, next slide.
Oh, wait, before you
Wait.
turn this though, this
Okay.
wheel here, it's not attached to anything except just it's a rotating, it's called a crazy wheel, so that it could go all directions.
And the reason being is, next slide. What did your husband
Overshot.
call this? Overshot. You'd load up the hay, it was like a big fork. You'd load up your hay, and then when he's on that contraption, he can swivel it and move it and get it to the top of the stack where he needs it. And then they dump it.
Now with these overshots, it took 2 men on top of the stack just to keep this hay moving back and forth so that you don't have so that it became like a big loaf. If you've ever seen them, they're a very pretty, well-rounded loaf that are about 20, maybe 25 feet in the air. But this was very labor intensive. It took somebody, at least 2 people on the ground, maybe even 3, to get the hay into some kind of windrow or mound so that it could be picked up. And then it took one person to either drive the tractor or the horse that would then run the overshot and the equipment, the plunger, to get the hay up on top.
And a lot of ranchers would help each other.
And you had more kids.
Yes. And when you talk about feeding a hay crew, you fed a hay crew. Yeah. Okay, next. There he is, all proud. But that shows kind of the haystack, and here's the hay getting ready to go up that they're going to put on top there. And there's the man on top. My dad said he never liked to be up there because he loved to play with snakes, but he didn't like them unannounced. Snakes would come up.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yep. This is
It
a
wasn't
plunger
there.
type. I don't have any old photos. See how ranchers take the idea and retrofit it to technology? Before there'd be a tongue with horses there. Now there's a pickup. But you can see the basic construction. You lay the hay down here and it pushes. See the big thing? It pushes the hay up over top. You still need your guys up there redistributing it a little. Because if you do a good haystack, the water is going to shed off and not spoil the hay. Next. Okay, this picture isn't about the girl in the sled. Up here, this is the door to the dairy barn. Look up there. Can you think you can get one more little scrap of hay in there? I don't even know how they did that. Marsha made a really great comment about the construction of barns. Yesterday you said those things stood no matter what.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is true. These old barns were built without all the engineering and all the designing, and they held a lot of weight and they held a lot of snow, and surprisingly, they're still there. Sorry, Ted, here with the building department, you probably would approve this.
Okay, next.
Marsha, there's going to be a program at the Chief Theater about barns in early April. I'm not exactly sure the date.
Oh, awesome.
But Bob McHugh is going to be narrating.
Excellent, thank you, John. Yeah, that would be great.
This is a ticket where you shipped your cattle to Denver. It's 1940. They were shipped from Milner stockyards. Granddad had 13 head of cattle, and he made I think there was like $49 were taken off for hay and to keep those animals watered and fed till they got sold. He made $648.98 off of them, 13 head.
And the same thing still applies today. If you take your animals to a sale barn, they will take off the commissions. Is that important?
Sounds like the fire alarm.
We're doing some testing.
Oh, okay.
We don't need to run for our
I don't
lives.
think we need to evacuate.
Okay.
We'll check.
But the sales barns still do take a big commission, and for feed, hay, any type of brand inspection, that sort of thing. But in addition, for every head of cattle that is sold in the United States, every time it is sold, the producer also pays $1 to the National Beef Board. And that beef board is what does the research, the development, the promotion, the pamphlets such as what we passed out here today. So all of the cattle producers are involved in the entire industry. The same is true with sheep, with pork, and with chickens.
That barn program's on April 10th.
April 10 at the Chief?
At the Chief.
What time?
It's a Thursday night, and I think it's 7. It's presented by HRC.
Thank you, Main Street.
That's awesome.
It's
Okay.
actually for the architecture of barns, and it's for Architecture Week. And
Oh.
the architects in AIA meeting.
Yeah, I'm gonna do one more little thing on the hay part and shipping cattle. Let's see. Milner had a stockyard. Oh, this is my dad talking. Milner had a stockyard, and we went there. We rode the caboose to Denver, and for every car full of cattle, you were allowed one passenger. 50 head went in one car. Everybody that went had some liquor, and there was always a good card game on the way. The caboose was not the warmest, and it was very slow, but it was a lot of fun. Us kids used to fight to see who could go. And then that ended when the truck came along because the train got to be too slow. DNRGW Railroad bought it out, and they weren't interested in shipping cattle that much anymore, so sometimes your stock would be shipped early morning, and then the 16 hours you'd get to Denver and they wouldn't unload them for 8 hours. So he says that in fact the last time we shipped cattle by train, we got to Denver at 8 a.m. and the cattle sat there till 4:30 in the afternoon. And the only reason they got unloaded was that my dad raised so much heck. That was about the end of that, and we all went to trucks. That was around 1948.
There were two reasons trucks came in. One, the slowness of the train and the inefficiency of the rail yards to handle them. But also, the advantage to having a truck was that it came right to your place. And you loaded it up right there, and then they went directly to where they were going. So you didn't have to figure out a way to get them to the rail yards and also back from the rail yards to the auction barn.
Yeah.
I happen to be probably one of the few people left that was involved with trail rides that brought cattle from the Grazing Association, which is where Round Mountain Ranch is now, down to the rail yards, and they were shipped out that way. And it would be an all-day drive. We'd usually start about 7:30 in the morning, and we'd get into town about 2:30 in the afternoon. Wow. And we knew that we had to stop that again because the traffic was becoming too intense, and we had to go to a different direction.
And my great-grandfather, before the railroad, he had cows. And he said that when they trailed he only had 100 head of cows, so he would just make the trip every 2 years. He trailed his cows from Milner to Walcott, and it took 3 days to get to the train. All right, crops.
No, it really wasn't that bad because it was hard work, but you know, there was a great camaraderie of everyone. And I look back on the cattle drives that I was involved with, some of the greatest people in the world, and what I learned from them far outreached what the cattle and the horse industry ever taught me. It was just a true love of the land and a true love of their lifestyle and a true love of the industry.
When was one of the last big drives you were part of?
It would have been 1970.
Okay.
Okay. Crops. Wheat, barley, and oats were the mainstay crops here as far as grains. You usually got around 20 to 25 bushel per acre. With new technology, we got up to 35, and I don't know what it is now. We don't have very many grain farmers anymore, some by Hayden.
We used to have about 85, in the 70s, we had about 85,000 acres of wheat, barley, and oats being grown in Routt County alone. Now we have about 10,000 acres at the very most. The reason is the prices in the 70s really tanked. You couldn't make a living on it. The price of equipment and fuel went much higher. And a lot of these farmers were starting to get old. And they couldn't really encourage their kids to stay in the industry. It was just, you couldn't make a living at it. And so at the same time, the government came along with a program to retire a lot of highly erodible ground. And it was an answer for many of the farmers in this area to take that program and to get out. But the good thing is that we now have a lot of young people who are coming back, and they're trying to figure out how to break out some of that ground again, how to get it into crops, how to grow more cattle, how to raise more sheep. And I'm very optimistic that agriculture is going to continue in this valley just because people are now seeing if you can make a little bit of money at it, why not try it again?
My daughter Sophie here, in the early 80s, my dad was he was the exact demographics, the aging farmer, broken down equipment, getting, it just gets harder when you get older. She actually remembers when she was little, the combine, playing in the grain trucks. She's probably the last of that generation that remembers that. Her little brothers didn't because CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, will pay you so much an acre not to farm. Well, when you're aging and you don't have the money to replace your equipment, that is very nice. He retired to Arizona. Yeah. But he still missed it. Yes. This is not threshing.
Rasher?
No?
I just lost it. Well, I'll tell you about it and it'll come to me. This gathers up the grain, cuts it off, and then it ties it, and there's the sheaves. It's a binder. The binder. It binds the sheaves together. These are actually like in those old, when you used to have the grain sitting up in those sheaves. Those are just the ones laying down. And next slide shows 3 horses would pull it, and that's a side view. Very labor intensive. Before that, they had a scythe. And you'd go out, whole family get together and tie all those things together and put them in bunches. So this was like modern. This was amazing. Next. Then once you got your sheaves, you had to separate your grain from the stalks. And this is the back end view of a steam tractor. This whole thing right here is a great big water reservoir for the steam. And there's more pictures, but in the back they're processing it.
And look at those tires, or those wheels in the middle.
This is Churchy Van Cleve. He lived over on the Elk. There's George Johnson. He was a neighbor too. When it was time to pull in the grain, the farmers made up a schedule. Everybody went to everybody's place, brought the threshing machine with them, and got everything done. So we got George Johnson from one farm, Churchy Van Cleve, and he's on our ranch doing the grain. And he has pulled up with this wagon that came from the river, and he has put more water in there. So do you call that a pot? That's a good question. Yeah, call it a pot. All right, everybody can call that one a pot. This is
Very competitive.
this is out of the pilot because it shows a little unencumbered. You can't really. Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Why do you think the steam engine is here? We got that long belt that's driving the thresher. How come it had to be so far away?
Because it blows up.
Could blow up. Thank you. Steam engines had cinders, sparks. Chaff of wheat is highly, highly flammable. You don't want your crop to go up just because you're trying to process it. Next.
That ever happened?
Oh yeah, I'm sure it did. And there was grain that caught on fire in bins, and there was lots of hay that caught on fire. So this is at my uncle's ranch. You can actually see here, you can't see the steam engine, but you can see all that chaff coming off, and the grain is going into a granary. This guy here, he's the one who is taking the pitchfork and loading the sheaves into like a hopper. I think a hopper, or it was probably like a conveyor. I don't know, it was before my time. It almost looks like it maybe, I don't know.
Conveyor, like it goes up there.
Do you know, Mr. Wither? No? Okay.
Is the belt made of leather?
No, not usually. They were a nylon
Oh, okay.
compressed.
Yeah.
About 20, 25 years ago, we still had all of the equipment, the binder, the thresher and all that. And so my husband said to my dad, I want to see how all this works. I'd like to do a field of oats and put it, and so of course everybody in the country came out and took pictures. It was really pretty darn cool to see those old stacks standing there. And when we got all done, my husband said, well, that's enough of that. It was a lot of work. Yeah.
Next slide. And there's the wagon loaded with all the sheaves. You got 2 men up there working. Next. Weather. Do we have time to go? People are free to leave. Are we over our time?
Well, it's right around 1 right now.
Do you want us to keep going? Because I can stop it here.
I do.
Okay. We just don't want to feel free to get up and leave if you need to leave. Okay. Weather. I don't know if we can truly appreciate the amount of mud back then. There was not a whole lot of gravel. And transportation with a horse with those little narrow wheels. We don't even know what ruts are compared to what they are. And there's a very good picture. Next. So weather even affected, of course, your social life. This is a wedding invitation in 1916 for my grandfather. He married the local school teacher who showed up to teach, and he nabbed her right away, right off the... You know, that's what happened. We kept bringing in young unmarried school teachers. The minute they got married, they'd bring in another one, so we populated
because they
it.
wouldn't allow them to continue teaching if
Right.
they were married. They had to be single.
So we populated the whole county
Just the
with
way it was.
teachers. It was awesome. In fact, Ferry Carpenter in Hayden, he got together and said, we got to get a bunch of young women in here. We got to set up where we're going to advertise back east. And that's how that whole Elk Creek schoolhouse in that book that's so famous, he says, we got to ship in some more women here. Yeah. So anyway, Albert was the first person that saw her get off the train, and guess what? His sister's going to board her. And within 3 months, they were married. And next, they were married at home in Poole, Colorado. Right? So in the back of this little diary, I find just this little excerpt. It says, Albert and I were married at Steamboat Springs, well, really at Poole, Colorado, Sunday, 9:30. That's 9:30 p.m. by George McDowell, a Methodist minister. He held services in the afternoon and got stuck coming back. That's the reason we were married so late. They had a shivaree at Chester's, which would be her brother-in-law, for us the following Sunday night. Do you want to talk on the chivalry?
Chivalry's a crazy thing. The neighbors would all get together, and usually they do it unannounced, and come roaring into your place with every noisemaker they could have. I've even heard stories where they would hang sticks of dynamite from trees and light these after dark, so that you were awakened with this terrible noise. And then generally they would take the bride one direction and the groom another direction, and they'd play terrible tricks on them. Everything from changing any of the food stocks that were in their cupboards to mixing up their cattle. Anything you could cause a little bit of grief. But it was just all done in fun. And at that time, everyone was so poor that there were no gifts. You just couldn't, no one had anything to give anyone else, but they'd find something. I've read stories where my husband received a cigar from one of the neighbors as a wedding gift. Or one of the neighbors brought me 2 spoons because she had a couple extras. It just shows how different it was, and literally hard scrabble when they got married. And then they put things together. Whereas in today, it seems like we put things together and then we decide to get married.
And if you didn't get it, I mean, who wants to be waking up on their wedding night with people outside with pots and pans and everything? But if you didn't get a chivalry, you were slighted. It was an honor to get a chivalry. Yeah, it's this big send-off. It was just the thing to do. It doesn't make sense to us now, but it was a huge, it was a huge community bonding. We're welcoming you into the community as a married couple now. Look, life is hard. That's the way I take it. Next. If I could read this. The coldest day of winter, it's like January 11th. It snowed and snowed. We went to Steamboat and
Intended to go on the train.
yeah, can you guys read it
But
from back
there
there?
wasn't any. So we got Milner's team and went. I nearly froze. We got in about noon and left about 5. We didn't get cold coming home. It was lots warmer. Albert got new overshoes and something.
High press.
High press boots, yeah. Last night it was 24 below at Steamboat Springs on the government thermometer.
Yeah. So usually when in Milner's team, that was actually Milner who started the town of Milner, you usually rode on a buckboard and you sat up on a seat and it had springs. And to keep warm, you'd always have a lot of blankets. Bob Gay said his mom used to put big rocks in the oven the night before they were going to go on a social event. Put them in like gunny sacks, and then you put the rocks down into those blankets for your feet. But he said it was always colder coming home though. Okay, next. Weather. What can you say to this? That's a drift. That's a snowdrift on one of the farms. And could you read the right side?
A Chinook wind again. Oh dear. I shall go crazy if they keep up. Churchies, Henry, and Bud were here. We had fried chicken and raisin pie with whipped cream. It was surely good. Of course, we had another thing too. I'll bet Mama's subscribed for the Enterprise for me. I got it today. There was no train last night because of a rock slide at Sulphur Springs.
So the way to get in town was either by your team or the train. Or a lot of places, it was nothing to walk 5 miles to the neighbors. Go have supper and come back. Especially on spring snow. What'd you say?
Do you know what the Enterprise is?
What is subscribed for the Enterprise?
The Enterprise, I think, is a newspaper or a magazine. Okay, attire. I love this one. That's my grandma. She loved to ride horses. She loved to be out. Those are bloomers showing. They were still wearing dresses back then. Here's the older ladies. They would not be caught dead doing that. But she was young and progressive. She was a school teacher. And the next slide.
Hang on, just a second. Look at that horse. Look how stout he is, and in the shape of his face, you can tell. And he's a tall horse, and that's the type of horse that they needed. For one thing, because they went over a lot of sagebrush, and the taller your horse was, the faster it could move through that. And you can also tell from the way the horse is built that he's considered a workhorse. He is not just a recreational pony.
Right. And you can see the little heels on her shoes or boots, little lace-up boots.
And the horse is branded too.
Yep,
All the
you're right.
ladies usually had their hair up and back.
Didn't blow away that way.
Right, didn't get in the way. And if you notice his mane, out by Milner, we live in Wyoming, it's always windy. Okay, next. All right, this is my favorite of the whole show. This is my grandma in probably like 1918, 20. This is Marsha. In like 1980, 90?
Probably. The big glasses?
Oh my, oh my. Has ranch wear, chore clothes changed that much?
No, just prettier color.
Yeah, right. I'm sure these were gray and white striped probably. I just thought that was kind of a nice correlation there. Yep. Okay, next. Today is the big day. I have to finish my waist for tonight. That means a nice blouse. We went tobogganing, had a fine time. It was surely fun. All the women wore overalls. They called me the teddy bear. Then we had a big supper at the hotel, and that would be the hotel that's over by McGregor, south of Milner, not the Cabin Hotel. Gee, but it was good. Served buffet style. There was a crowd there too. Then Patterson, he was head of the mine, the McGregor mine, gave a big dance at the hall. We had lots of fun there too. They gave several prizes. We won a doll. They danced till after 4. We went home at 12:15. Served supper too. Albert didn't work at the mine. These dances would go till 3 or 4 in the morning, and you'd go home on Sunday and sleep all day. You still had to milk the cows. I shouldn't say sleep all day. In between your chores, you'd sleep all day and rest up Sunday. They had amazing shindigs.
And they still do down at the schoolhouse at Ladore. If you're ever invited to one of those, be sure to go because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but don't whine about getting tired.
Right. Okay, next. About a tire. What can you say about this? She's pregnant. She's in stockings on the dirt. I don't know why. And if you noticed in the first slide of that Grant Wood painting, I swear that's the same apron with the rickrack around it.
We had to talk
Turkey.
a little bit about the women
Yeah.
and how hard they had to work. They didn't have microwaves, and they didn't have electric stoves, and they didn't have washing machines. And everything that they cooked was on a wood stove. And when you look at what they had to do on a daily basis just to feed their families, it was pretty amazing. There's many books out there, but one of my favorite is called Woven on the Wind, and it's a collection of women's diaries, mostly out of the Montana, Wyoming area. But it talks about how lonely these women got because they so seldom saw other women. And if it was another woman, it was probably a relative. And how lonely they would get and how seldom they got to go to town because that was really the man's job to take that wagon and team, go to town, get all the provisions, while mom and all the kids stayed home and did all the other chores that had to be done. I have great respect for these women. When you consider she probably baked 4 loaves of bread a day on that coal stove. And that was just the start of her day. It's a pretty amazing life that they led.
For sure.
And is that a turkey?
Yes. He's holding the turkey. I don't know why. It's lost to time. Social. Real quick. Out on Elk River, there was a huge hall called the Grange Hall. They're having a celebration. This is Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They lived on that bench where the Connell gravel pit was, up on that little hill there, where Saddle Mountain Ranch is.
And
on
that
the
would
way
be
to
Doug
Milner.
Munger's grandmother.
Yeah. They're having some kind of celebration because there's a cake there and he's holding a flower as a boutonniere. So they were well respected. The Johnson family took in kids and raised them. So I'm sure this was a huge outpouring of the whole Elk River community, and they got together all the time. This lady right here, April 5th, she's going to be celebrating her 90th birthday in Craig.
Yeah.
Maxine Turner. What a great lady. So they would hold dances there, and we'll have one excerpt Well, I'll just tell you about it. They would hold like if there was a needy family or a tragedy or someone needed help, a bunch of women would bring a bunch of goodies, and they'd make this big goodie basket, and then the auctioneer would be the man who was calling the dances. He would auction it off at midnight, and all that money would go to this family for whatever purpose, and people paid. They didn't have money, but somehow they all got together, and these baskets went for a lot of money. They also had box supper socials to get the young crowd together. Women would make their little box, their supper box. Oh, next slide, I think it talks about it.
Hang on, just before you go to there.
Oh.
With that, this building is about a quarter of a mile from where I live, and I can actually remember going there as a kid for dances and that sort of thing, community events. But when my parents came much later than Diane's, my grandparents came in the late 30s. They'd come from Nebraska, started out doing the Dust Bowl, and they came over the pass on November 1st, and it hadn't snowed yet. And my grandmother told me one time that when she dropped down over this valley, even that late in the fall, she could remember how beautiful it was, and she thought she'd died and gone to heaven. Then on Christmas Eve, they went to a Christmas Eve party here at the Grange Hall. And during the time that they were there, and I don't know how late they stayed, but she said when they walked out and got into their old pickup, there was about 11 inches of snow, fresh snow on the pickup. She said, I thought I died and gone to a coal hell.
Exactly. So when everyone was dancing, all these little kids would run around and play under the benches, and it was just when you were shut in the winter, well, that's why Winter Carnival started too. These dances were a godsend, like you said, the women, they'd all get together and talk, and then you had that expectation of making something nice, okay, to wear. Next slide, it says, let's see, Albert and I and Walter went up to the dance and basket supper at the Grange New Year's Eve. We had a dandy time, got home at 4 a.m. Wasn't so warm as usual, cloudy. Albert and I paid $3.50 for my old woman's basket. And then in the bottom it says, now isn't that, what does it say? Oh, you can't read it either. Something about, well, wasn't that a foolish thing to do? They had these baskets. Wasn't that a foolish thing to do? They had these baskets they'd make up, and then the young men, if they wanted to sit with the gal, they'd bid on her basket. And if you won the basket, you got to go eat with that gal. That happens several times too. There's different variations. But talk about eHarmony and Match.com. They had the baskets, right? That's how you did it.
You're out of batteries.
Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of the end, I think. All right. Yeah. Well, I got one quote. Margaret Rossi, the Rossis that live up in Yampa, Margaret Rossi said, "The best thing about the good old days is they're gone." I would hate to go back and live those days again. I think those days built a lot of strength and character, but you should be happy you're living now. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good National Ag Week.